Hi there, I'm Claudia King.
My name is Nathan Spiteri.
My name is MaryAnn Kaczmarski.
My name is Ashlen Hilliard. I am a cult intervention specialist.
I'm a podcast host and a corporate speaker who helps people heal from their trauma, get rid of imposter syndrome, and live life with unwavering confidence.
I'm an advocate, a speaker, a TEDx speaker, a writer, a producer, and an actor.
I'm a former DV survivor, now a thriver, who works with other women survivors to create their best life possible.
I am going to be presenting on an upcoming panel discussion with Courage 365 on coercive control
During the 30 days of courage.
This is an event for survivors and advocates, and it's going to be absolutely amazing.
So I really encourage you to join us. And the details are in the description, but I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 30 Days of Courage. I'm your host, Ashley Easter. I am the founder and executive director of Courage 365, and I am so glad that you have decided to tune in tonight. You have caught us in the middle of our biggest event of the year, the 30 Days of Courage. This is where we have different panel discussions, where we have self-care challenges, support groups, and all kinds of amazing prizes and activities to do during this month to help support your healing and growth. Our theme for this year has been all around investing in yourself as a survivor, and I'm so glad that you decided to tune in, truly listening to the wisdom that's going to come from this panel tonight. That is real investing in yourself. That is real investing in your healing, and I'm so excited for you to hear what our guests have to say. Now, if you've never heard of Courage 365 before, I know a lot of you have. Some of you have been with us from the very beginning when we used to do in-person events before you know what happened in the world, COVID. And others of you maybe are just joining us even today. And I just want to say that Courage 365 isn't an organization meant to empower survivors of abuse and advocates. We focus on educational materials, supportive resources, support groups, and really just everything you could need to take those next steps in your healing journey. Now, tonight we have a special topic. We're going to be talking about demystifying coercive control. And I chose this title because there's been a lot more conversation around the term coercive control in the media. There's even some countries who are starting to use different criteria in their courtrooms to determine if coercive control has happened and allowing consequences to be placed for that. However, it's a pretty new term, and from the little bit of research I did, I believe the term was first coined in 2006, but it's really only gained popularity in the last couple of years. That being said, it is one of the most insidious forms of abuse, and it may not leave bruises, it may not leave injuries that you can see, but it can go very deep. So for us, we're going to have a conversation about what coercive control is, different perspectives of what it can look like, and what we can do to protect ourselves from it. So without further ado, I would like to bring our panel on for tonight. Hey everybody, welcome to 30 Days of Courage. It is
Thank you.
so good. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to this hour and listening and learning and just sharing with everyone.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. And in case everybody, we saw them in the introductions, but in our first square, we have Ashlen, then Nathan, then Claudia, then the last square is MaryAnn. MaryAnn is actually on our board, as well as the other beautiful things she does. And instead of me trying to tell you about each of our guests, I would really like them to kind of give a little bit of a self-introduction. So, Ashlen, I'd love to start with you. Can you give us a version of your story, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me on, by the way. I'm super stoked to talk about coercive control and make it, like you said, sort of the demystification of it, I think is really important. So my name is Ashlen Hilliard. I have my master's actually in the psychology of coercive control. I am a cult intervention specialist helping families who have loved ones in abusive groups or relationships. I also provide recovery services for cult survivors by offering psychoeducation and online support groups. I'm entering my 6th year of working in the cult recovery field. I have worked with multiple nonprofits in the field. My entry was actually working as a case manager within polygamous communities out west in Utah. I was one of like 2 case managers in the whole state working with that population. And so I was working with those who decided to leave. And I then went on to work with the International Cultic Studies Association as director of events before starting my own LLC, People Leave Cults.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's rare to find a cult intervention specialist. I know a lot of survivors of cults, but the resources are really slim. So, really glad that you're here and thank you for sharing that. Nathan, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. My name is Nathan Spiteri. I am Australian, but I do live in New York. So my story started when I was 8 years old. I was sexually abused by a man, and this relationship went on for about 5, 6 years. It started out very rough and violent, turned into a Stockholm syndrome type relationship, and from there he abandoned me when I was 13 years old. And for 2 years I questioned who I was, what I was, where I belong in the world, who I belong with. I was lost. Was I gay? Was I straight? All of that, all of those questions. 15 years old, I started going to cruise lounges and gay clubs, doing what I was doing with these men, but then I'd be violent with them, beat them up, bash them, rob them. And that was my FU to the world, my way of getting my power back, my way of feeling alive. Fell into drugs, into alcohol, started shooting heroin, smoking crack, tried killing myself plenty of times. And I kept this secret within me for over 25 years. I didn't tell a soul about being raped for 25 years. And I finally came out about it. I finally told my best friend. Through that, I ended up getting, therapy, group therapy, AA, Narcotics Anonymous, Sex Anonymous therapy. And for me now, it's about educating the world on sexual abuse, especially male sexual abuse. It's something that is still such a taboo subject. People don't want to talk about, people don't want to know about it, especially when it comes to men. I'm a writer. My memoir just came out. I just did a TED Talk. I just finished shooting a documentary about my story, and it is now being turned into a movie. So for me now, it's about traveling the world and doing these keynotes and speaking of male sexual abuse and how we need to educate ourselves. We need to change the narrative. It's 1 in 6 men, but it is a lot more than that, with the thousands and thousands of men who will never come forward, who will never have the courage. So if I can help facilitate that, if I can, help these people, men and women, find some peace, move forward, get some closure in their abuse, then all the power to it. That's I knew I'm doing the right thing.
Thank you for sharing that, Nathan. I know even when you do the TED Talks and the documentaries and all those things, there's still something about sharing our stories that can be painful or heavy, even if we've done it over and over again. And so I thank you for your vulnerability and for bringing up how men and boys can suffer abuse as well, and then just the confusing narrative that comes up around that, and then just also the amazing things you're doing in the world to support survivors. And just really honored to have you on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's an honor to be here.
Claudia, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So I am the host of the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people from all walks of life. I am also a former police officer, and while I was a police officer, I was actually living in a domestic violent relationship with another officer. I was able to get out of that situation, but it took me many, many years before I was willing to even say that I had been a victim of abuse. And I think a lot of that had to do with the position that I was in and not wanting to feel less than. But I really saw that less than feeling showing up in a lot of aspects of my life. So once I was able to admit that and really look at healing and moving forward, I was able to be in a place where I could work at a nonprofit supporting other survivors, start the podcast, and do things like this, where hopefully my story of resilience will be the strength and the hope for someone who's in a similar position.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I hate that you went through those things. And I'm also just inspired by how far you've come. And I think you're talking about a subject that a lot of people haven't heard much about. And that's, violence that can happen even within those who are meant to serve and protect. And so I think that's a really important part of this conversation. So thank you so much. MaryAnn, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
My journey began as a kid because I was a victim of violence, abuse, coercive control all the time I was growing up. And at some point I knew that it wasn't, I didn't deserve it because I was too young. So I always had a plan to get out. And in those days, you had to be about 18 to get out. But that was my plan, graduate from high school and get out. And I did get out, and I'm a survivor. So it led me right into a marriage that was pretty violent and abusive also. There was quite a bit of coercive control and a lot of violence. Took me 8 years to get out because I took my vows in church and I took that seriously. And I kept thinking, and I kept hearing, go to church and you hear, keep working on it, keep doing it, keep, whatever. So I just stayed with it for almost 8 years. But finally, I was talking to a doctor where I worked. I worked with doctors and nurses and everything. And he said to me, do you realize you're an abused spouse? I'm like, no, I didn't know that. So I went home and told my husband, and he said, my ex-husband, and he said, well, did you tell him I'm an abused spouse? And I said, no, because you aren't. But it was the beginning of my eyes opening and seeing things. And I got counseling, therapy, and got a good attorney, and just really got good resources to help me get away from him. And it was the best thing that ever happened. He tried to get back, the whole story. But from the time he was gone, I was so happy, so relieved, and so ready to reclaim my life. And that's what's happened. It's taken a while for me to feel ready to be able to help others or to try to help others, but that's where I'm at now. I teach some classes at a domestic violence residential shelter, shame resilience, healing from trauma, safe people. I love the women. I love those women. I just love them. And I'm also facilitating some support groups, including one for Courage 365. We have a Courage Club for DV survivors, and I love those women too. So I'm awed by the panelists, and I'm awed by the people, and Ashley, of course, and I'm awed by the people I meet in doing this work because they are strong. I think Claudia said resilient, and just with some support, it's amazing what can happen in people's lives. So that's what I'm committed to. My life is wonderful now, and I'm committed to helping every woman I work with have a wonderful life also. And I'm very honored to have been asked to be here, Ashley. Thank you.
You are so welcome. Thank you, MaryAnn. You are such a beacon of light, and appreciate all the things that you do for Courage 365, and just the way you've taken your story and now you're in a place where you're helping so many other women. It's just really beautiful. I am honored to have everybody here on this panel. As you all can see, every person on the panel has a very different experience. There has been abuse, or they have worked with people who have experienced abuse, and they have that thing in common, but their backgrounds are so different. And so that's why I wanted to bring everybody together to talk about coercive control. And before we jump into that set of questions, I just want to remind everybody who is watching live that at any time you can drop a question in the comment section. I actually encourage you to do that. And I will scroll back through at the end. We're going to do a live Q&A after I ask my questions. And so just make sure that if you do drop a question now or at the end that you use a question mark, because when I am scrolling through, it'll be a lot easier for me to see your comment if you use a question mark in there. Okay, so let's get started with some more panel questions. And this is just for everyone. When we look at the term coercive control, what does that really mean to you?
I'll go, I guess. I guess for me, coercive control is any form of assault, threat, humiliation, and intimidation, whether it be emotional, mental, physical, that is used to harm, to punish, or to frighten the victim. I think most people who use coercive control are, these narcissists, people who gaslight others. And for me, my coercive control started straight away with my abuser. The very first line he said to me was that if I tell anyone, he'll kill me and he'll kill my family. So it was straight off the bat. And, as an 8-year-old child, you believe these things and, you question these things. So I think for me, coercive control is any form or pattern or act of assault, any form of threat, any kind of humiliation or intimidation, as I mentioned. Again, whether it be mental, emotional, physical, that is put onto a victim by their attacker, by their abuser.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful because it is a broad definition, and I love how you brought all those things in there. Ashlen, I'm wondering from your perspective, what coercive control looks like or how you kind of define it for the communities that you often work with.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan, for getting the ball rolling as well. I like to think of coercive control as an umbrella. I'm kind of a visual person, so forgive me for my hand movements, but I like to think of it as an umbrella. And below that umbrella is categories like cults, domestic violence, trafficking, gangs, extremism, etc. And so we see how coercive control can exist in these different forms in different categories of abuse. Coercive control refers to the mechanisms used for control within each one of these contexts. So, for example, coercive control may look very similar to, coercive control in cults may look very similar to coercive control in abusive one-on-one domestic violence relationships, but it also may have its unique differences. So I think it's really important to remember that when thinking about the term coercive control, we're thinking about an inflicted pattern of abuse over a period of time. It's not the same thing as a one-off incident in which you or somebody else accidentally, hurt someone's feelings. We're talking about a pattern of abuse. It's designed, like Nathan said, to shame, humiliate, or degrade someone with the ultimate goal of removing autonomy. The purpose of coercive control is to further render the victim in a complex state of having to rely on the perpetrator, even though it may not feel safe for them to do so.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Thank you for that. Claudia, what are your thoughts around coercive control and what does it mean to you?
So for me, it's really creating an alternate sense of reality for that victim. So putting them in that state of questioning themselves and wondering, are they crazy? Are they imagining things? Are they making things up? Are they really the bad guy? I think it's a concerted effort to put that pressure on a victim so that it makes them feel emotionally, mentally, financially, physically unstable, and thus reliant on the abuser and then compliant into whatever the abuser is trying to accomplish. One of the things I did want to say, though, I think we are moving forward in a positive direction. Here in Colorado, coercion is actually one of 5 different factors that can be utilized legally to add a domestic violence enhancer to a charge. So we are recognizing that coercion is a part of domestic violence. It doesn't have to be physical, and they are utilizing that to place that enhancer on suspects. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
That's really good to hear. I enjoyed your definition, also knowing that that is being added as an enhancer, because I think all abuse is wrong, but not all abuse is criminalized yet. And so it's good to see some states moving forward with languaging around the coercion, because a lot of times people can say very manipulative things. They can give different types of threats, whether they're overt or covert threats, and they can be extremely damaging. And yet, if there's not a bruise, sometimes the courts in the past seriously. So I'm glad that there's some progress being made. MaryAnn, what does coercive control mean for you?
First of all, thank you to Nathan and Ashlen and Claudia, because everything you said was phenomenal. I don't have much to add, but I do want to say that this date, it's so appropriate for a coercive control panel, because October 10th is actually World Mental Health Day and has been since 1992. I didn't know that, but it is. So there's more and more attention on mental health, more and more attention on the kinds of things we're talking about, the coercive control, because as we know, bones and bruises heal. I used to be beaten black and blue, and then in a few days or a week, I looked the same. But the long-term effects of coercive control are deep. They really do try to strip somebody of their sense of autonomy and their entire sense of self. It is incredibly insidious. And I just wanted to share a couple of examples from the work that I do, because you might not think it is, but if your partner calls you an idiot or a whore, name calling is coercive control, a form of it. Your partner asks you to stay home with them and not go to visit your mother or your best friend. Let's just have a nice evening in together, the partner says. Isolation is coercive control. Your partner suggests that your chosen outfit doesn't make you look good. Wear the one I've chosen. You look your best in this one. So restricting is coercive control. Your partner calls you all day long to see where you are and what you're doing because I love you, in quotes. Monitoring is coercive control. And one of the worst, and I think Claudia mentioned it, is what are you talking about? You didn't wear a red dress yesterday. You wore a blue dress. Don't you remember? I'm getting really worried about you. I think you might be going a little crazy. Maybe there's some Alzheimer's there. Gaslighting is definitely coercive control. And I even had a client who had a mother-in-law helping her son to gaslight this young woman. So, but can you also see how some of these messages, they're a little confusing too? Because if someone tells me, I want to stay in with you and have a nice night, it sounds like they care and they love you. But it's really just isolation, and it's it's just the isolation and the constant. The negatives always outweigh the positives. They throw in a few positives. You look your best. I want you to look your best to keep you kind of hooked. But most of what they're doing is so destructive, so negative, and all the things that Nathan mentioned. And also sometimes women will say to me, well, he says or does that because he cares about me. Well, maybe he cares about you, but why does that behavior leave you feeling afraid, sad, insecure, unstable? So it's a lot of manipulation, a lot of really bad tactics here.
That's really helpful, and I loved how you kind of went through that list of examples. I think that brings it home and really helps people understand some of the things that we're dealing with. Yeah, all of your definitions and explanations, I think, just all melded together really covered so many angles. And Nathan, I wanted to specifically ask you a question. So, when it comes to child sexual abuse, what role have you seen coercive control play in that, whether that is in your own life or with other survivors that you work with? And then I'm specifically interested in maybe the men and boys angle, because in a lot of the conversations around coercive control, it has been very focused on women, and women experience abuse. So that conversation should be there, but we can't forget the men and boys. And so I'm just really curious what your thoughts are as it's specific to child abuse and specific to men and boys.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Let me touch on my abuse, because I guess that is the easiest way for to explain the coercive control and what I went through. And just touching on what Dr. MaryAnn said, you know, this guy beat me up, and this guy slapped me in the face and would punch me and would choke me out and all of that stuff. But it's the bruising that all goes away. That is, you know, I'll heal from it. But it's the mental and it's the emotional abuse that sticks with me forever. That will stick with me forever. Will stick with these victims forever. As I touched on earlier, you know, the first line this man said to me, and it started from the very beginning. He abused me, he raped me. The first line he said to me was that if I tell anyone, he'll kill me and kill my family. And then from there, you know, the grooming, the lies, and manipulation began with him saying that this is what my family wants. And this goes with any abuse, but I'm just talking about my abuse, whether it be a man, whether it be female. You know, he said to me, the first few things he would say to me was that this is what my parents want, that if I say anything, they're going to think I'm a liar, that my parents hate me, that he loves me, that no one else wants to be with me. You know, he told me that I picked him up at the pool. You know, the first time he raped me was in the change rooms at the pool. But he told me that I picked him up. He told me that I was looking at him. He told me that I was giving him the eye. And, you know, through that gaslighting, through that narcissistic behavior, I was thinking, well, shit, did I look at him? Was I looking at him? And I know, no, I wasn't. But he puts that doubt in your head, and he puts that doubt into, did I actually do that? Was I actually thinking that? So for me, my coercive control that was put onto me started straight away, and it went on throughout my whole relationship with this man. And I call it a relationship because, like I said, it started out very rough and violent. He would beat me up, he would do all of that stuff, but as I said, it turned into a Stockholm syndrome type relationship. It turned into a loving relationship where he would ask me questions. He would, again, tell me how much he loves me, tell me how special I was, tell me that no other boy is like me, and I love him, or he loves me very much, and how much I love him. And again, but continually saying how, you know, my parents and my family don't want me, don't love me, will never believe me, that if I say anything, I'll get in trouble with the police and he'll be fine. So, you know, whether it be men or women, it's the same thing. It truly, as I mentioned, you know, it's 1 in 6 men and it's 1 in 4 women. But when they really, if every single man came out and spoke about their abuse, it would pretty much be the same. It would be 1 in 4 and 1 in 4. So there are a lot of men, through their coercive control, through their abuse. And again, I think this comes to as well, toxic masculinity and male role models. Because men, as you know, and you are specifically pertaining to men don't talk about their issues. Men are strong. Men keep it all inside. Men, you know, we're the leaders, we're the household, you know, we run the family, we do all that, you know, we can't show any weakness, we can't show any form of vulnerability, we, you know, all of that stuff. But what I've learned is that you are more of a man if you are able to show vulnerability, if you are able to communicate, if you are able to cry, if you are able to say, listen, I have a problem. There is something going on with me. There is this, there is that. So, it all comes back to the coercive control. And this is something I dealt with all my life. The self-sabotage, the imposter syndrome, through his words, through his lies, through his grooming. For me, for a very long time, like I said, it took me 25 years to tell my story. And for those 25 years, it was all my fault. I deserved it. I don't deserve love. I don't deserve happiness. I deserve to have these bad things happen to me. And that was all through his coercive control. That was all through his grooming, his lies, his manipulation, telling me that this is what I deserve, that this is who I am. And that mental side of it is so much more powerful than the physical, because yes, physically he beat me up. Physically he raped me. Physically he destroyed me. But I healed from that. And I healed from that quite quickly. But it was the mental side. It was the emotional side that almost killed me, that almost made me kill myself, that almost made me want to do harm to myself and do harm to others. So, coercive control amongst men it's a powerful thing, because again, we're bred to be strong, to be powerful, to not talk about our abuse and to keep it all inside. And we keep it all inside. And this is something I did, and this is something that many men do. We keep it all inside. We don't talk about it. I had so much anger and so much hatred toward myself, toward the world, and it just built and built and built and built. And for many men, this happens until they lose control. They do something wrong. They'll go out and, abuse their wives, kill their wives, and murder suicides. A lot of those things that is happening today is due to these men not getting the help, not doing the work that they had to do on themselves, because of the mental damage that was done to them, because of the emotional damage that was done to them. Yeah, I could go on about this forever. So I know there's other questions, and the girls want to talk as well. So, I hope I answered that question, and I hope I shared some insight on what I went through and what men go through. And it's just the same, if not worse, as what women go through. We all go through it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think you brought up something really interesting around, not only was there the coercive control happening in that dangerous relationship, with the Stockholm syndrome and the gaslighting and the violence, but then you also look at society, and there's coercive control there around men and women being quiet about what's happened to them. And often it's for different reasons. A lot of times there'll be different things placed on different groups of people, but the coercive control can be a societal thing as well. And so I appreciate that.
Yeah, and just to touch on that really quickly, 80% of global suicides are male, and over 80% of those suicides is due to men not speaking about their childhood trauma, or not speaking about their trauma. And it all comes back to coercive control and the manipulation that was put on them, and the lies and the grooming to, I can never ever talk about this. I can never ever say anything, because if I do, I'm going to be less than. No one's going to want to be in a relationship with me. I'm not going to be considered a man. So, it is very, very sad, and it is something that we need to start talking about and changing the narrative on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And before we go to the next question, I just want to remind our listeners that we are going to be doing a live Q&A in a few minutes. And so if you have a question, go ahead and drop it in the comments at any time, but use a question mark so I can scroll back through and find them easily. Our next question here is for Claudia. And Claudia, I was wondering, you used to be a police officer, so obviously there are good people in law enforcement. But you also ran into an abusive officer, and there's some abusive systems that can be at play with this power structure. And so I wondered if you could kind of talk about coercive control specifically as it relates to people in positions of power, particularly those who have been called to protect and serve but are doing the opposite.
I feel like you did a great segue there, kind of talking about coercive control within our society and how a lot of times that prevents people from reporting or enables people to act. So I agree, there are good police officers out there. There are a lot of them. But just like any profession, bad people get in the bunch. Unfortunately, I feel like sometimes because of the power associated with that profession, it can be a place where a narcissist or an abuser might thrive. And that's because it's a place where they can easily find that power and control that they're craving. And it's okay. They're allowed to do that and even encouraged to do that. I feel like on the flip side, in my personal experience, for a long time, I didn't realize that I was being abused or I didn't want to admit it. And I realize now that I would take that anger, not out on other victims, but in relation to them. And what I mean by that is I would leave a call where I had been 3 or 4 times before to the same woman who was having the same situation and experiencing the same results that she had experienced before, but she just couldn't leave. And I would be so angry when I left her, and I would say to the other officers, you know what? Women who allow this to happen to themselves, they should be charged as aiding and abetting abuse. And I know now how horrible that sounds. And I also know now why, that's not the case. But I feel like that anger was really subconsciously directed at myself. I knew deep down I was in an unhealthy situation. I knew deep down that I was being isolated, that I was being financially controlled. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I could report it when I did realize what was going on because I'm supposed to be the tough guy. I'm the law enforcement officer. I'm the one that's supposed to have all the answers. And how can I go out and have all the answers for you if I don't even have them for myself? So that is another reason I think that, it can be easy to control or manipulate someone who's in a position of power sometimes because they feel like they can't say anything. Kind of just like Nathan was saying with men, they're supposed to be strong and tough and brave and not have any feelings. And that's how I felt as a police officer. I'm supposed to be strong and tough and brave and take care of my own home situation, and not make it a problem for anybody else. So all that to say, I feel like sometimes systems where power is in place, there is that level of coercive control buried within it, and especially in male dominated fields for women, because, men are more apt to say to a female officer, oh, it's just a slap. What's the big deal? It's just a joke. Who cares? So that's gaslighting. We know now. It seems innocent and harmless, but that's really perpetuating this culture and society that we have where people are made to feel like they can't say what's going on if they're in a certain position because it might reflect poorly on them. So we really have to keep working hard to show people that it's okay to talk about what you're going through, no matter what that is, and no matter what your position in life may be.
Yes. Wow. And I'm just thinking about what you shared with positions of power, and we're using the police force as an example, but just seeing how that goes to so many other systems where there's power, and patriarchy, and a lot of religious groups, Christian or otherwise, are really kind of set up to attract narcissistic people. And it's not that everybody who is a leader in the police force or in a church position or other politics, but when you are having this position where somebody's automatically going to be given power, influence, and deciding factor over other people, those who do have nefarious intent are going to look and seek out those kinds of jobs and positions. And so, again, it's not that everybody in those systems is a bad, abusive person, but it's going to attract those kinds of people wherever there is power that can be found. And yeah, just super, super helpful. And thank you for sharing that with us, Claudia. Ashlen, I'd love to ask you a question. So, as a cult intervention specialist, I wanted to kind of have you share a little bit more. I know you talked about this a bit in your intro, but kind of how cults use coercive control to keep members imprisoned. And a lot of times people think about cults having these walled compounds and these physical barriers, and those absolutely 100% exist. But there are probably even more cultic groups that don't have those physical barriers there, but people are trapped and imprisoned in them through coercive control, mind control, that kind of stuff. And so I would just kind of like to hear sort of what your take is on that, how coercive control can show up, even if there's not a walled compound, kind of keeping somebody in a facility.
Sure. And thank you for the question. Yeah, cult members can feel imprisoned psychologically with or without a walled compound. It's true. And I think that it is an important question because cults rarely look like that stereotypical physical walled compound. Although, like you said, Ashley, I have personal experience working with groups where there was a compound on the property. And yet, when people hear survivors' stories of cult involvement, one of the biggest questions survivors get asked is, well, why didn't you just leave? Right? If there wasn't this physical compound, then why didn't you just leave? And it really highlights the lack of insight that sometimes people have and the misconception of cult involvement and coercive control and how that happens in cults. So, one of the most damaging effects of controlling and coercive behavior is that it creates a trauma bond between perpetrator and victim, known as a trauma coerced attachment. Alexandra Stein discusses this process in her book. It's called Attachment in Cults and Totalitarian Systems. So there's a few different types of attachment as we know it. There's secure, also known as open attachment, which allows for flexibility in relationships between two parties. So person A knows that they can rely on person B, but they also feel that they can seek help outside of the relationship without penalty to the relationship that person A has with person B. Insecure attachment is where person A doesn't really feel as if they can go outside of person B in the relationship. It's closed off, it's non-flexible, they're sort of their only source of engagement. And what becomes so dangerous and sinister about cults and what differentiates trauma coerced attachment is that originally there may be a sense of safety between person A and person B. So when applied to cults, that can be the cult recruit and the community at large, or the cult recruit and a leader, a person of authority. In the beginning, groups offer people something. Sometimes groups promise community. We often tell people that no one intentionally joins a high control group. They may offer, this newfound religious belief. They have promised some people to help get them off of drugs. I mean, groups offer something. So there's this initial introduction of the new idea and belief, and this may happen via recruitment, or it just may be someone's own self-seeking that leads them into these systems. This is often followed by an infatuation phase. So we often say that joining a group is sometimes like falling in love. You fall in love with the ideas, the concepts, the community they offer. Falling in love is not always rational, as we know. You may also get love bombed by members of the new group in this process. I know that the term love bombed has also been gaining more and more traction, but it's when you are flooded with positive outreaches by people in the community, anything to keep you there. So groups offer something, and at that first entry into a group, you may not feel a source of threat. It may feel like a very safe place. So at this point, the recruits, the new cult member, may not have any red flags that this is something bad. But as things progress further, there is this promise that often gets offered of certainty, which keeps them on this path. So it's appealing to have certainty of one's afterlife, one's purpose, etc. All these things create initial safety, trust, community within a cultic group. And that relationship may feel flexible and open. But over time, as our brain's processing becomes hijacked, personal sacrifice or suffering for the cause becomes a positive sign instead of a negative. And this can leave a cult member reliant on the group and on the leader. So once safety is initially created between person A and person B, the cult recruits, the leader, or the community, over time, the member becomes reliant on the cult. And when the greatest source of safety becomes also the greatest source of threat, a trauma bond between leader and member is formed. And that's a little bit about the process and how, even though there may not be a physical compound, how this process can happen, and it can create totalist control, psychologically speaking.
I think that's so insightful, and sort of the different phases that you go through, because sometimes from the very beginning, like in Nathan's story, the abuse was right off. And then there's other situations where it's more of a ramping up into it, and that can be very confusing, but the coercive control can be there nonetheless. And I'm even kind of looking at some different comments, and people are saying, you know, as they're listening to the information about cults, they're like, my relationship sounds like that. And so I think it just goes to show how all of this is so intertwined. And we have just a couple of minutes left before we do a live Q&A. I see some questions being dropped. But MaryAnn, I wanted to ask you, you work specifically with domestic violence survivors, and I'm wondering if you've seen different types of abuse kind of mingled in with the coercive control. So like you have that coercive control piece, but then it's kind of mixed with other forms of abuse, and just sort of wondering what your observations have been there.
I think, first of all, almost no one is a victim of one kind of abuse. If they have physical abuse, there's usually also some coercive control, some emotional, sometimes sexual, financial. I don't even know anyone who only suffers from one type of abuse. And what Nathan said is so important, because the statistics are staggering. The World Health Organization actually estimates 1 in 3 women globally will be a victim of physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. And that doesn't count emotional, social, emotional, financial, spiritual. I mean, it's staggering. And as Nathan said, even women don't report. I didn't report it ever. So there's so much more to do here. And it's funny that Ashlen said this, but the name of the book I'm almost finished with is called Why Doesn't She Just Leave? Because that's the question everybody asks. Why did you stay? What's your problem? It had, and they're looking at you, the victim, as maybe the person who has some responsibility here. And the last thing I want to say, just in general, is that after this, I'm really interested in finding out how can we prevent people, rather than picking up the pieces once people have been damaged, how can we prevent some of this violence and abuse in the first place? Why do people want to hurt other people? What is missing in their life? What do they need to heal? Are they capable of healing? So that's for the future. But in the meantime, coercive control is rampant, and I've seen it combined with the physical with almost every woman I work with. Almost every one of them has had somebody put their hands around their neck, for example, one to the point of unconsciousness. I mean, it's astonishing. And you can see that they get combined. For example, someone told me when he was punching me, he was telling me I was a worthless piece of crap. So it's the combination of these two. Abusers are very clever, very manipulative, and they'll do and say whatever it takes to get what they want from you. And with the women I work with, this is the challenging part, really hard for them. Oh, but he loves me. Or, oh, but I really love him. And then you have to look at, like, what is the definition of love? Because if someone loves you, they would never intentionally hurt you in any way, shape, or form. And also, this is even tougher to realize with a lot of these abusers, and Nathan kind of touched on it when he turned, I think he said 13, he was pushed out, basically cast aside, because for these abusers, if it isn't her, it'll be Susie or Tom or Joni, somebody else that they think will meet their needs. They will be after. So it's not a case of love; it's a case of getting what they want and being able to do it. And as we said, it's so insidious. It just shreds people's feeling of autonomy and sense of self. I work with one young woman. She told me when she was 17, and she's not much older than that now, but when she was 17, she's living on the streets, living in a park, actually high on heroin, eating out of a trash can. But she was willing to do it to be with the father of her son. And she believed she was nothing without him. He had convinced her that she needed him and she could not leave him. Took her about 4 years to do it, but she did finally do it. And I've heard things like, maybe the abuser spit on me because I said the wrong thing. Or maybe the abuser continually cheats on me because sometimes I'm too tired to have sex. And she has 2 little toddlers, 2 little babies. Maybe he calls me an idiot because I dropped out of school in the 8th grade. And I'm always saying to them, no, stop. You are a really good person. You deserve so much better. You deserve to be loved and respected and cared for. You deserve kindness. And sometimes I can see them, they kind of like hearing it, but it depends on how wobbly their self-esteem still is. If they start to doubt it. But I've also seen that the longer the women I work with are in a really good program, getting really good counseling and therapy, really good work, then I can see their self-esteem starts to come back up and they say, yes, you're right, I deserve respect. And that's the best thing that I can hear.
Wow. Thank you for that, MaryAnn. Those real life examples, I think, just they're going to resonate with so many people listening. I can already see in the comments that they are. And just, again, just emphasizing how a lot of times it can seem casual the way abusers throw around these manipulative, coercive terms and phrases and ways of being, but there's actually so much plotting and planning behind it. You know, they have an agenda. There's something that they're trying to do, which is gain power and control over another person. And I think this just sort of highlights how much thought it really goes into making somebody else's life a living hell. Because oftentimes we have to take a lot of thought and time to make somebody's day feel good, you know, and they're kind of using all that creativity and doing it on the opposite side. And it's very hard to see and know that. We are about to take some of our live questions that have been dropped. I have one more question for all 4 of you. And I know this is a hard one, but if you can try to just give me like some real short answers of what is your favorite tip or piece of advice for helping people untangle themselves from coercive control, and just something short and sweet that people can take away. And Nathan, let's start with you. Do you have any tips for us?
Um, Education. It all comes down to education. It really does. Just seeing the signs and being aware of what is happening and who is in your relationship and what this person is doing to you, whether it's a narcissist, whether it's someone gaslighting you. Just being aware and being strong enough to be able to talk to someone about it, to get help, to I think the most important thing is to leave, because yes, you can talk about it, yes you can, but I love him, or but he loves me, and it was just a one-off and it's never going to happen again. I think the most important thing is to educate yourself on it, is to see the signs, but more importantly, be able to leave. And something Dr. MaryAnn touched on is are we ever going to be able to end it? No, we're never ever going to be able to end sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, any of that stuff. But if we can educate ourselves, then we're going to go a long way to preventing it, to at least stopping it in one person or in the next person.
Thank you for that. Claudia, what's your quick tip for us around untangling ourselves from coercive control?
I'm going to say awareness, which is very similar to education, but just really paying attention to what people are saying to you and what is the meaning behind that. And I would say to approach things with a healthy dose of skepticism. So I think it was Dr. MaryAnn earlier that said, oh, but he just wants to spend time with me because he loves me. So just willing to take a step back and look at what the motivations of somebody could be, and just allow those possibilities to enter your head and allow yourself to entertain them.
So good. MaryAnn, what's your quick tip for us for untangling around
coercive? I'm going to echo Nathan and Claudia and say even a glimmer of awareness starts this process. And if something in your gut, or as you would say, Ashley, our intuition is not feeling right about what's going on, it's telling us this is not okay. Pay attention to it and then get some help, get some resources, call the hotline. There are tons of resources out there. Do not think you're alone. You are never alone. Never. People are there. People want to help you. And also never give up. Just never give up on your healing or yourself. Never. Never, never, never.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note, if you need some support, if you go to courage365.org and click the Need Help tab, we have a list of hotlines and other resources. We also have support groups that are offered occasionally, and we do have them coming up this weekend. So, yeah. Ashlen, what is your quick tip that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I know education's already been said. I love that answer. I think education is really important, and everyone who is on this call is doing the work, so to speak. You're learning for yourselves. You're listening in. You're wanting to learn more about this topic, and I think that's really amazing. And it's a great form of self-care as well. I think too, a lot of people come to me and they'll say, "Well, how do I know that I'm in a coercive controlling relationship or a coercive controlling group dynamic?" And it's hard to know without knowing the specifics of one situation. But a general rule of thumb that I tell people is, well, what would happen if you decided to leave? If you tried to leave, would there be pushback? Would they say good luck on your next venture and send you off? Would there be repercussions physically, mentally? It's just one of those questions that can help sort of, if you can kind of keep one of those questions at the back of your head, what would happen if I chose to leave? That's usually a really good indicator of how that relationship or group is going.
That's really a helpful question. All right, everyone, we are going to jump now into the live questions. We've gone a little bit over time because the questions have honestly you guys have created such a beautiful discussion. So I hope the speakers are okay with us going a couple minutes over the hour. And what I'm going to do, since there's several questions and I want to be able to get through all of them, is I'm just going to choose one person to answer each question, and we'll try to spread them around pretty fairly. But the first question is, what was your anger or anchors that helped you literally survive when you're trapped in these layers of coercive control? And, these different abusive situations, they're really hard. And basically the question is, how did you keep going? What was your anchor? And MaryAnn, I think I'm going to pitch that one over to you.
Now, again, this is just for me, but for me, what kept me sane and kept me together enough that I could even plan and to get out was I meditate twice a day. I do affirmations. I journal. I write all the time. And just even the visualization, but really meditating to try to stay calm enough that I could take steps forward was really helpful for me. Some people would be exercise, but for me, that's what it was.
Yeah. Something to kind of clear your mind and give you a little bit of space to feel better. Yeah, that's really good. This one I'm going to give to you, Claudia, and it is, how close do you think we are to the legal system catching up to research on mental, emotional, psychological abuse and criminalizing it?
I think we have a ways to go. Unfortunately, yes, we are making positive steps in some states and in some areas, but I think it's still very misunderstood. You yourself even said earlier, I think when coercive control, the term was coined, but it's really only become popular more recently, and the same thing with gaslighting. So I think that as technology advances and we're still fighting to catch up to so much, it's just another layer that's going to be difficult to get through. So unfortunately, I do think we're a ways behind. My recommendation would be for anybody that's suffering that type of abuse is to start keeping a record. So somewhere that's safe and not accessible by your partner, so whether that's a journal or on your phone or somewhere at work or in your car, start making notes of exactly when something happens, time, date, all the details that you can remember, and if there's any witnesses. Because if you can build that evidence, you're going to have a better opportunity to have that go to court and be successful. But generally speaking, unfortunately, I think we have a ways to go. Things like this, though, are going to make it easier for people to recognize and get out sooner rather than later.
Good. Thank you for that. Ashlen, this question, and I think this is kind of in your wheelhouse because of the cult work that you do that is often religious based, but do you feel that being a part of a religious cult and those in leader positions know the damage they are putting on to the members of the organization? I'm not convinced they are. So basically, do leaders know what they're doing to their cult followers?
I think to sort of echo off of what Claudia's talked about with law enforcement and positions of power, it can sometimes attract extremely narcissistic, abusive people. When I think of coercive control and the definition of coercive control, I always go back to intent. It's that pattern, it's that intent. And again, coercive control within religious groups, from like someone who is a pastor or in some sort of religious position of authority, if they do harm, they do harm. Whether or not they intend or not, it's hard to know. But if there's not a system in which people can come forward and voice concerns, or if there's no repercussions for the actions that they have taken, that's a major red flag. And it's almost as if they are aware that there would be no consequences for them if people were to approach them for that behavior. So while I can't say on a universal level whether they know of the harm they're committing or not, I think In a lot of groups, it is very intentional, and the harm that is created is exponential, and it certainly fits that profile of coercive control.
That's good. And I think sometimes there's a distinction between the people at the top of these groups and people who are sort of like their lieutenants underneath. And sometimes people know what they're doing as well, but oftentimes the further up you go, the more people know what they're doing. And people who are given the positions below, they may know less and less of what they're doing.
And how do they respond, to getting for people coming forward and say, we've been harmed by this? How do they respond to that? I think is really important to sort of suss out and see.
Absolutely. Nathan, this question's for you. Someone's wondering your thoughts or the thoughts of the panel on the term hurt people. Do you think that is useful? Do you think that is kind of cliche? What do you think about that?
Oh, that's so funny. It's not funny, but it's funny because that is one of the first lines of my memoir.
Huh.
I remember hearing that line years ago, and it just stuck with me because I can relate to it so much, and I think it is very relevant and very true because I was hurt. I was hurting, and all I knew how to do as a result of that was to hurt others, hurt the people closest to me, because I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to open up and communicate. I didn't know how to share. The only thing I could do was to hurt those around me because that was the only way that gave me life, that made me feel alive, that gave me my power. But in saying that, and I told this to the publisher of my book, and I was talking to her about hurt people, but she said, Nathan, what you need to realize now and what you were doing is healed people heal people. So, yes, hurt people do hurt people. And, if you haven't done the work, if you are unaware of what is really happening to you and what you're going through, you're going to hurt others because that is all you know. But once I healed myself, once I was in that process of healing myself, of my understanding of my relationship with this man and what I went through and my relationship with my parents, my family, with lovers, with friends, with all of that stuff, I was then able to communicate what I was going through, how I was feeling, what was going on with me, and what I'd learned in my past to now be able to pass that on to other people who are hurting and able to heal those who are hurting. So yeah, hurt people do hurt people, but more importantly and more powerful than that is healed people heal people.
Thank you for that. And I would add kind of another piece there too, and this sort of goes back to abusers knowing what they're doing. There's different types of harm. Like there's unintentional harm from being hurt and not knowing a different way. And then there are other people that who have gone through some of the most atrocious abuse and they've been deeply hurt and they haven't hurt other people in that same way. And so I think there's different types of hurt and there can be choice at play. And sometimes you'll see people from the same family who've gone through the same things making different choices. And so I think it is true that hurt people. And if you look at somebody who's hurting others, it's probably because they have hurt in their life that's unaddressed. And also at the same time, there's some people who've been really hurt and have been able to move through life in a way that they're not actively harming others. And then also there's another category of people who maybe hurt others at one period of time and then began their healing journey and now they help heal other people. And so it's like it's a useful statement to start conversation, but there's a lot of nuance to it, as with all of these chats. And I've just really loved hearing from all of you, and thank you everybody who's tuned in and participated in the chat with your questions. I want to let everybody know that each of our guests, they have different things that they have done in the world outside of this conversation, whether it's TED Talks or books or programs. podcasts, all of that. We actually have that pinned inside the group. If you're watching this later on YouTube or on our podcast, which we probably won't put this out for another 6 months on those places, but that'll be in the links below. But inside Facebook, all the resources that these beautiful people have are tagged in there in sort of like a slide deck with links and everything. So I have a couple quick announcements before we go, but I just want to thank each and every one of you for participating on this panel. Your insights were invaluable and so honored to have you here. All right, so before we go, I do have a couple of quick announcements for everyone. During the 30 Days of Courage, each week we are doing a self-care challenge. We already have put out the first week self-care challenge and the second week self-care challenge. That's the one we're in the middle of now. And if you participate in the weekly challenge and follow the instructions, this week is all about using a coloring page to focus your mind and be in the present moment. You can be entered into a drawing. And this week, our drawing that we have, the giveaway is going to be this cute card deck. It's Dogs Against Anxiety. And it's like these little affirmation cards. They're a lot of fun to just kind of help you when you're having maybe a little bit of an off day. And who doesn't love to see a cute picture of a puppy? So this is going to be one of the prizes for that. Now, here's the other thing. If you complete all 4 of the self-care challenges during this month, you'll be entered into our grand prize drawing at the end of the month. And if you missed last week, you can still catch up on that. So as long as you have completed all of the different 4 challenges by the time we do the drawing for the grand prize, then that will be okay, even if you have to get behind and catch back up. But for this week's challenge, this is the prize for it, the Dogs Against Anxiety. And all of those challenges are pinned to the top of the group in the featured section. You can scroll through and see the instructions and directions. Let's see what else. Oh yes, and I want to let you all know I'm really excited about this. On the 30th, we're going to be hosting the Ultimate Courage Showdown. Did you like my game show voice? We're going to be having a trivia game show. That's just going to be a light ending to the 30 Days of Courage. We talk about deep, sometimes dark subjects during this month, and so we're going to end it on sort of a positive, fun note. A lot of the trivia questions are going to be pulled from the insights that we learn on these panels. So make sure you watch or rewatch the different panel discussions so you can play along as the audience in the comments. But we will have 3 contestants battling it out to see who can win this trivia game show. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be on the 30th. And then last but not least, on Saturday, all the Saturdays of this month at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have our live peer support groups. There's a Zoom link in there you can click on. There's an event. If you go to the event sections, you'll see I actually have all of the events laid out, all of the support group events laid out. So make sure that you RSVP to the one for this week and that you use the link for the one for this week. The dates will be in there, but the feedback from the one last week was just amazing. It's a place to just meet other survivors and advocates, gain some support, and have a little bit of discussion around the topics that we covered in our panels. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the 30 Days of Courage. We are just so grateful to have you here. Thank you for investing in your healing and investing in yourself by participating. Sending you all so much love. And as always, live with courage.